me just jump right in. I think so. One very important thing to keep in mind when thinking about the risks that we are facing today is that actually a lot of progress is happening, right? So this is just one graph from many that could be shown to illustrate this. Here is the share of the world population living in extreme poverty, which is defined as having less than $1.90 per day, and this has decreased rapidly, right? There was almost the universal condition for humans to live in until around 1800, but then with the Industrial Revolution, that has changed dramatically, and even in absolute numbers, the extreme poverty has decreased. Poverty at higher poverty lines is a different thing, but I mean overall, people have got a lot more wealthy and healthy. So also, I could also show here life expectancy or infant mortality or so. So a lot of good things are happening. And when we now talk mostly about the risks of specific technologies, it is clear that also these good things that have happened, they are in large part, we owe them to technology. For instance, we also owe them in large part to fossil fuels, actually. So that's, I think, something very important to keep in mind when discussing the climate problem. We will not solve the climate problem, I think, without being aware of how great fossil fuels have been for us, which is not meant as an endorsement of their continued use, right, many decades down the line. But if we want to solve a problem, we have to make the right diagnosis first. And so impressive as this progress has happened, it's still, of course, there's still a lot of horrible things going on, also in terms of poverty, right? Many children dying each day from preventable diseases. But if this continues, as we all, I think, hope it will, it can't continue for very long, actually, in historical timescales. I show you here on my second slide. So this is world GDP for the last 2 millennia. And this has gone really through the roof, right? Also, roughly at the time of the Industrial Revolution, though it's not clear whether that's really the thing that has made the difference. Now it's like you see that this curve is almost exploding. And if you extrapolate this growth, which I think has been difficult to fit the best curve here, but some exponential curve does quite well for a couple of last decades and centuries. If you extrapolate that into the future, I mean, that's it hits the number of atoms in the visible universe or so, right? The number of euros annual GDP. So that will not happen, I think, right? So something will change. So in the sense that this growth will at some point stop or will be transformed into something else. Maybe, I don't know, the very category of GDP is, of course, tied to human affairs, and it's not clear how long these categories will have their grip at all. But so something will change, and that can be bad news, right? It could be that this is like an explosion before the big collapse. So there are different possibilities. The exciting thing, in a way, is that we really don't know, but that's also, of course, disquieting. Here are some different types of futures. This is inspired by a paper about long-term trajectories written by a large group of some leading researchers in existential risks. Well, one possible outcome in this great, it's also sometimes called the great acceleration, right? Yeah, like GDP going through the roof, but many other things also going through the roof, technological progress and so on. So one possible outcome is, of course, extinction. Or it could also be like a societal collapse where GDP breaks down and the number of humans breaks down and maybe recovers also, maybe in waves, also we don't know. But this kind of a bad outcome here, at least, is what I meant with the first point. Then I think another outcome that is actually quite prominent in political discourse without being openly acknowledged as such would be like stationarity soon. That's I think if you ask a typical member of a Green Party or so, what is their vision for the long-term future? I think it's the idea is that we live like more in harmony with natural boundaries, use more bicycles and more organic food or so, and maybe there is still some technological development, but not in the sense that it completely changes how humans live, or that we live together with machines in ways that we don't dream of, right? It's just we live in in maybe close-knit communities or so. Well, that would be another scenario. But in the effective altruism community, my impression is actually that's not taken very seriously. And I think for good reason, but it's worthwhile highlighting this, right? That also the environmental movement has really a vision that most of effective altruists don't even take seriously. And then there is, of course, astronomical expansion, right? That humanity, maybe then more so human civilization, mostly based on artificial intelligence, also expands out of the solar system, maybe even the galaxy, or technological metamorphosis. That's my last point here, right? That it's mainly we humans enhance themselves or live in symbiosis with artificial intelligence in ways that we can't imagine now today. That could, of course, go hand in hand with astronomical expansion. And then also these developments might lead to some kind of stationarity where GDP doesn't grow any further also, but it wouldn't happen as soon, I think, as imagined and hoped for by the environmental movement, right? Much farther down the road when we have, as it's sometimes said, achieved technological maturity, right? Basically developed everything technology-wise that is to be developed for us. So, but of course, yeah, we focus here especially on the first point. I just wanted to raise also the what if we don't go extinct, right? It's also an interesting question. But how could things go very wrong? There are these big four risks that are especially serious, according to many in the effective altruism community, that were also mentioned by Otto: nuclear war, climate change, artificial general intelligence, and artificial pandemics. But also, of course, ruining our potential by locking in a permanent dictatorial dystopia also could be seen as an existential risk. So maybe I should have mentioned that here as well. In any case, it's quite striking about these four how historically novel they are. I think that's also that's disquieting, right? So all these big, really big risks have, I mean, with artificial general intelligence, not even here, right? It's just we expect it to be a very serious risk for the reasons that Otto mentioned, or many of us expect it to be a serious risk, others don't. Still, I think there is a very crucial dilemma that is, for instance, not fully acknowledged, I think, in Toby Ort's book. We want to move to a phase where things are not as critical as they are now, right? Where we are basically safe from extinction. We want to lock in existential safety, but on the other hand, we want to keep our options open and leave it to future generations to do with the world or with civilization what they want, right? They might have much better ideas than we, than what is good, right? What is really valuable, right? If our ancestors has decided about how humans should live together, they might have found it obvious that, for instance, like homosexual relationships would remain banned or so, but we know better, right? And of course, our descendants will also know better. At least that's what I expect. And so we want to keep options open, but we all still want to fix things in such a way that existential safety is somehow guaranteed. I think that's very tricky, perhaps irreconcilable. Very curious to see whether I will get any ideas about how this can be done in this conference. And finally, my last slide, what are our data points about how serious the existential risks are? So there is one very worrying, prima facie at least very worrying data point, namely, we don't see any advanced civilizations around us, right, that have tried to contact us. That's the so-called Fermi paradox, right? The great physicist Enrico Fermi came up with this thought like in the middle of the last century. It's actually quite surprising that we don't see any extraterrestrials because there should be suitably many planets that support life in the galaxy. Why don't we see them? So of course, the bad scenario is that there were many, but they all killed off themselves, right? And that would be a very bad, it would be a bad omen for us. And that could be the case, right? It would be very bad, for instance, Nick Bostrom has often highlighted this, if we discovered primitive life on other planets. We must hope basically that primitive life is very rare, because if it is frequent, that will likely mean that also intelligent life is somewhat more frequent, and that would be a very bad sign for us. So we must really hope that we don't find any primitive life on other planets. Luckily, we see that, and that's the good news now, we are very late in Earth's history, right? Earth will get uninhabitable in around 1 billion years, so we are pretty late. And if imagine that we were very much in the beginning of Earth's habitability era, then that would be a very bad sign. It would probably mean that intelligent life can appear very rapidly, that the threshold is very low, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So it's actually compatible with life, and especially intelligent life being extremely rare, right? So that's a comforting data point that we are so late in Earth's history. But then, and that's another thing, I don't know, maybe good news. We are very early in overall cosmic history. I just learned this actually rather recently, but it is expected now that the universe will be habitable, right? In terms of there will be habitable planets, like for I think order of magnitude 1 trillion of years, right? And we are now like 13 billions of years after the Big Bang. So there's a lot that can happen, and maybe a couple of tens of billions of years down the road, and the whole universe will be populated by civilizations that can make great use of the universe. We just don't know at present. Maybe we could be one of the germs for this, but maybe not. So that's what is at stake. We know, who knows what the future will bring, but yeah, the history of the universe as a whole is still rather young. So much for now.